Welcome back. This week I'm joined again by Sally and Kate, where we continue our discussion and conversations around leadership in organizations. So far, in the very first video, we looked at this really important leadership need to move into the space of clarity, about understanding the clarity of purpose rather than the certainty of direction and the certainty of what you're doing. It's a really important thing, we think, for leaders to understand and move their thinking to. In subsequent videos, we've looked at the need, at the shift I think we've seen between the bravery of the initial few weeks of the lockdown, right into the need to be courageous and looking after yourself, and actually courageous to ask questions of the people that work with you, the answers to which you might not know. There are two great videos on those two subjects. Go check them out on, I think, week 2 and week 3. This week we're going to move on and look at sort of the future of what we think is happening. So over to you, Kate. You've had some interesting thoughts and ideas about a particular well-known model on change.
Yeah. Hi, Michael and Sally. Yes, I was thinking about the Kübler-Ross change curve, and I've seen that being applied a lot in organisations, and people talking about, are these stages of grief really applicable to organisations? So Elizabeth Kübler-Ross developed her stages of grief by actually talking to people that were dying. And so there's been a lot of discussion about, actually, is that something that people in organisations do actually go through? And I think there is no doubt that people do feel, when they're faced with big changes, they do feel maybe they can move into denial quite quickly about, is this really happening? And then they can get quite annoyed or shocked about what they're expected to do, and then they perhaps move into a bit of depression and then start to think about, okay, well, maybe this could work, and they create a way of accepting what's happening to them. So I think there are some of those stages that people perhaps go through. But what I was looking at the other day was another additional stage, which maybe doesn't apply to the Kübler-Ross model, which is when we move through change, we do start to find perhaps meaning in what we've experienced and start to have some hope for the future. So we start to think about, oh, why did this happen, and what have I learned from it, and what can I take from it that actually is positive? So we can go through trauma and come out the other side knowing that we've experienced trauma, but still we've got something that can be positive from that. So that's what I was just thinking about, how do leaders start to help their staff and employees think about where have we got to, and what can we take so far from.
That's a really interesting addition to the model, isn't it? To add in this sense of hope and energy at the end of the curve. And the role that leaders play in that. Sally, what are your thoughts on what we've just heard from Kate?
Yeah, well, we're starting to see a huge volume of research, which is not connected to the pandemic, but has been undertaken over the last couple of years with regards to something called post-traumatic growth. And what's been brilliant about some of this research is what it's really identified is that it is really possible for people to go through very challenging and difficult and traumatic incidents, but actually to come through the other side feeling that they've grown as a result. And this really links to what I think Kate was saying. But in all of those pieces of research, what they have said is that people need to be supported in that reflection. So as they're going through something particularly difficult and coming out the other side, if they do receive a significant amount of support, and a particular type of support, then actually they can come through the other side, recognizing that what they've been through has some real meaning. And I've started to think about this in terms of the situation that we're in at the moment. The type of support that those people receive is support where people have encouraged them to reflect on what they learned as a result of that experience. And also to encourage them to focus in a more optimistic way on the future, perhaps in terms of thinking about hope. What is hopeful about the future and about where they're going next. And this is the difference that I really think that leaders can make, particularly now as we're transitioning into a new way of working, that if leaders are in a position to encourage people to take the time and the space to reflect on their own experiences, how has it been for them? What have they enjoyed about the experience? What are they grateful for as a result of the experience? What changes have they made in their life as a result of this experience? Then it is really possible for people to look forward with hope and with optimism, rather than thinking it's all a disaster and it's just going to get worse. So understanding where people are in that change and facilitating hopeful and optimistic conversations can be hugely beneficial, I think, at the moment.
They were three great questions that you asked there, Sally. We must make sure we put them in the narrative for the video at the bottom. And I think what you say is really interesting, because it links back in my head to the very first video that we made about the difference between certainty and clarity. And if certainty is about false promises, and you get to the new beginning or the new space where you want hope and energy, but if the promises are found to be false, then there is going to be no hope and energy. And that links back to the need for clarity of purpose rather than certainty of the promise, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. It is really difficult, I think, for leaders to provide any kind of certainty, and I'm not sure that we should have ever expected them to, but they can provide clarity on a psychologically safe environment. They can really lead by example and role model openness, authenticity, vulnerability, and most importantly, hope and optimism for the future.
So Kate, an interesting addition to a very old model, isn't it?
Yes, and I think for me, just listening to you, Sally and Michael there's something that really highlights that we're all really different on this particular change journey, aren't we? We have very different circumstances, we might have very different reactions, and just hearing different colleagues talking about their experiences and how that people would wish for different situations for themselves, but they are where they are. And so I think for leaders to really personalize, and this isn't just like one big message about, okay, this is hope for the future, but it's about really personalizing what each individual is going to need and meeting them where they are in the journey and supporting them.
Okay, so there you are, folks. That's our leadership and organizational conversation and thoughts for this week. Hope you've enjoyed it. Please get involved in the conversations on either Facebook or LinkedIn with us, or leave a comment on YouTube if you can. We'll see you again next week. Have a great week.